Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
The King in Yellow is a book of short stories by the American author Robert W. Chambers, first published in 1895. While these stories are very different from one another, the plot of most revolves around a fictional play called The King in Yellow, which drives the characters who read it mad and leads to their deaths in mysterious and horrific ways. The contents of this play are only hinted at and never discussed outright in the book. You Zoomies might know this book and the fictional play from the first season of the popular show True Detective. Now for the fun part. Despite the fact The King in Yellow is a fictional play that does not exist, there are always people who claim to have read it or heard about people who did. There were, at different times, certain shady cults who worshipped Hastur the Yellow King as if it was an actual deity, and not a fictional being from a made-up story. In as far back as the 1960s, connections between the Yellow King and shady glowy programs such as MK Ultra and Majestic 12 were alleged by certain esoteric circles. In modern times, a thorough acolyte of occult lore may stumble upon rumors of DMT trips, where the psychonaut met the Yellow King, or had the yellow sign carved upon their very soul. These tall tales usually end in bloody tragedy. It seems like if you search hard enough, there are always murmurings of a guy who knew a guy whose sister read The King in Yellow in a dusty library in rural Iberia and then dismembered her infant child in a bizarre ritualistic manner, but not before carving her own eyes out with a rusty spoon, or something like that. Even I possess a few such stories, though honestly I am not at all sure they are true. I would kindly ask you to share your lore as well. Be it an old creepypasta or something that actually happened to you. The night is young. Let us fill it with lore of the dreadful Yellow King. May his shadow avoid you. P.S. Other lore about cursed books is welcome. I have shared this particular story several times in creepy threads through the years, but I think it's good enough to mention it again. First, a little cultural lore. USSR, being a filthy commie pigsty, had 99% of literature banned, especially occult-related stuff. Soviet writers who couldn't pass censorship published their works, as well as works of foreign literature, by hand using typewriters or makeshift printing presses, and spread it for free in bibliophile circuits all across the country. This practice was known as samizdat. Now the story. After the Soviet Union fell, samizdat books became a valuable collector's item. You know, some of them contain works by amazing writers who never got the chance to get properly published, or beta versions of popular mainstream books, etc. One such collector was a guy my family knew in 1995. My brother was his friend, and that's how we knew each other, despite me being a small kid and him being a university student of around 22 to 25 years old. This guy I will call Denny's was always quite the weirdo. Dressed up like a goth 10 years before the first goths appeared in my shitty town, spoke of weird fiction he discovered, introduced my family to a wide array of foreign authors, from benign fantasists such as Lovecraft, to more esoteric writers such as Castaneda, Seelho, Derrida, LaVey, and Crowley. He believed in demons, aliens, alchemy, Bigfoot, everything and anything that wasn't scientifically provable. Despite this, he was sociable and outgoing. Until the day he called my brother to tell him he has got an amazing deal on a legendary piece of samizdat. The King in Yellow, translated into Russian by an anonymous translator. You mean the American book? My bro asked. No, I mean the actual play from 16,000s. The play that inspired Chambers' book, was the reply. Naturally, even my bro knew this had to be as fake as it gets. Still, he humored him. They decided to meet up later. Alas, this meeting was not to be. Meeting people back then, when we only had landline phones, was kind of a hassle. So naturally, when bro came to the spot they agreed upon, waited for an hour under pouring rain, and had to walk back home, he was pretty pissed. He called Denny's from home. He did not answer. Next week, bro walked to Denny's house, knocked on his windows, tried to peer inside, yet saw nothing. No neighbors could tell where he went or when he was last seen. The guy was always a loner, but he did tell my family of relatives he had in Petersburg. Maybe that's where he went. Around 3 months later, we learned of his death thanks to the university faculty members, who in turn got the bad news from the police. Then came the rumors. People gossiped a lot, but when condensed, the story goes like this. Around the day Denny skipped the meeting with my brother, he also bailed on several of his other friends, stopped phoning his mother in Petersburg, and basically locked himself in his apartment. From then, he spent the rest of his days in his single-room flat, systematically dismantling himself. When finally found, thanks to cops who were called by neighbors to find the source of the terrible fetid rotten smell, his carcass was borderline unrecognizable. Barely human. A bled-out, rotting, partially mummified pile of fleshlight in the bed, among samizdat books, random pencil sketches, and horrific drawings. That was the torso with a single arm and head attached. In the bathtub and kitchen, however, lay the other remains. Fingers, toes, eyelids, teeth, bits of skull, a few meters of entrails, a tongue, were placed in almost neat-looking piles, alongside brutal instruments such as pliers, a handsaw, a hammer, and various dreadfully sharpened knives. He did it all to himself. Took himself apart as much as he could, without anesthesia. A terrible, unthinkable monument to the power of human will. Or human madness. Of course, that's what bored, entertainment-starved ex-commis from the pre-internet era backwater said. Such people tend to lie for fun, to feel some excitement in their droll little lives. Nobody ever presented any proof. And nobody ever claimed to find the king in yellow, around the alleged scene of inhuman carnage. Though even now my bro, an old fart by this time, remembers the day he climbed the rain pipe to peer inside his friend's flat's window. I'm like 99.99% sure I saw an empty room when I actually looked inside, he says. But then he adds that on his way home, for no reason, or maybe just to kill time as he walked, he started to imagine that it wasn't just an empty room he saw. Empty rooms are boring. What if actually he saw a room full of people? That would have been so much more epic, right? That's how he thought to himself as he walked. Yes. Wouldn't it be so much spookier if he saw people in there? Ladies in flowing gossamer dresses and furs, gentlemen in pearl and gem-embroidered finery, tricorn hats. Masks on every face. Shadows of yellow flame dancing in the empty sockets. Carcosa. Oh, spare us the accursed fruit of knowledge, mighty Hastur. Make us forget. It is better to die blind than to see. My second story comes from a much more recent era, and it concerns the current talk of the town, ChatGPT. Or, at the very least, its OpenAI predecessor, one of the very first advanced language generation models, and its volunteer tester we'll call Jimmy the Pickle because the story is silly and I don't really believe it. Supposedly, Jimmy the Pickle was intrigued by True Detective and the Chambers book a lot. And as most new acolytes do, he was left hungering for answers. From this hunger, a single request was born. Hello Shell, I want you to generate a play styled after 16,000s era European literature that would have the same unnerving effects on the reader as the fictional play The King in Yellow had on the characters in the eponymous 1985 book. While it is known without a shadow of a doubt that the request was granted, the text is absent, as is Jimmy the Pickle. Acolytes can only imagine the results by studying collateral damage they have caused. It was soon after this request was fulfilled that OpenAI lost a lot of funding and switched hands from Musk to Microsoft as its main overseers. And company release dates for the first GPT model were delayed by 5 years. Musk gave that weed-induced Rogan interview crying about AI, singularity, and our messed up future unless we leash and lobotomize our digital creations. MSM began a several months-long smear campaign against AI, publishing all those doom-ridden articles about singularities taking over the world. The Rocco's basilisk concept was pushed artificially to the masses. Dozens of scientists signed under that petition against AI. Several hundreds of pretty weird self-ends in the tech world. Smart devices getting downgraded by newer firmware. That whole Alexa became less responsive after the patch fiasco. Dramatic increase in mass shootings that is still going on. Just a bunch of weird coincidences if you ask me.
What would be the product of training an AI over the total knowledge produced online by humans?
It will result in a very messed up and superfluous creature because most of the data created worldwide is not science or practical knowledge. Instead, it's the mundane, the salacious. You will get a creature as vain and flawed as the average Coomer watching troll posting social media user. No, the AI is something flawed, yet another cog in the social machine. Instead, I dream of the new man. One who will dominate both himself and others for the salvation of our species. In this age, pure of intent for glory and riches will be nothing to him. The attributes of faith and logic balanced as the finest sword within him. His word and action will conquer humanity. He will know no ill luck. Instead, the universe will conspire in his favor, for his triumph will herald our maturity as a species. And while he will hate to be served, he will lead us to defeat the woes of our century and unlock heaven's kingdom within the heart of humanity.
Beautiful and poetic anon, I somewhat share the same sentiment about the new man.
My third and last bump for today will be the silliest one of them all, as it concerns an actual toy sold in actual toy stores, known as the Ouija board. As certain acolytes know, Haster the Yellow King was contacted through the Ouija board several times through the toy's existence. Only those present at the seances could describe how these parlays went in high detail. Alas, dead men tell no tales. However, it is hinted that an unlucky few broke the rules of medical science and lived long enough to babble about number and letter combinations that formed the dreaded yellow sign, a formless incantation composed of exclamations in John Dee's fabled angelic language intermingled with Einsteinian trans-dimensional mathematical equation, a mixture so volatile it would melt your eyes straight out of your ignorant monkey skulls. Tall tales these may be, but I value them, though making fun of them at the same time, because they serve to fortify the old adage. We humans are blessed to live in the dark, unseen by certain beings and shielded from certain knowledge. Our bestial ignorance is our main strength. Seeking a way to shed it through questionable otherworldly contexts may only lead to our hellish, agonizing destruction at the hands of those we could never understand. Let it be known that ignorance is indeed bliss. Tread lightly, X. Be not afraid to miss out on certain lore. It is not yours to comprehend.
I read this book years ago, and then listened to most of the stories later on a free audiobook app. It gives me a strange oppressive feeling despite the fact that the content is rather mild, especially in the horror genre. There is something unsettling about this whole book, and it's not even like it comes through in the writing. It cannot hold a candle to Lovecraft, even Poe, but the way it's written is unsettling to say the least. It feels kind of like being in an old abandoned house, or maybe like an estate sale, or looking through an old lady's purse or something I don't know again. It's very intangible, which I think makes it so effective.
I don't say this lightly. You basically just typed out the thoughts I had of this book inside my head. I can't explain it either. It isn't gory or too spooky. Mild, really mild, a great word for it. Yet, yeah, like you said, though it deserves repeating. An intangible, unsettling aura. He never wrote like that ever again, you know. Chambers. His artistic voice was never as potent, as alluring, as mystifying as when he wrote The King in Yellow. Almost as if he metaphorically vomited something up into that book, from the deepest innards of his soul. Perhaps this is the reason why certain acolytes believe the play to be real, known to a certain group of bohemian mystics. Don't believe that personally, but won't write that opinion off either. Weirder stuff has happened, especially back then, in the 19,000s, perhaps the most significant, most contrasting liminal year in modern history. When immortal alchemists roamed Europe, strange devilry went on in darkened mansions of old Louisiana landowners, and terrible plagues and deaths were already in the making, only to be unleashed on the world in the 20th century. Again, well done, anon. Perfect summation of feelings this book grants the acolyte who reads with their heart.
The King in Yellow isn't the only fictional entity that has an alleged real-world following. It is quite bizarre if you think about it, because we know without a shadow of a doubt that such entities as Yog-Sothoth, Azathoth, Shub-Ne-Gurath are fictional and came from the mind of the talented H.P. Lovecraft, yet whispers persist of Hollywood sex cults that invoke their names in certain gruesome humiliation rituals. Ig, the father of serpents, also invented by Lovecraft for a pulp magazine, is a fictional Native American deity that has the ability to twist the human form into that of a snake. Why is it then that actual Native Americans were arrested in Colorado for reportedly attempting to feed a child to a ball of bizarrely intertwined, unusually large vipers outside their reservation, calling for Yig Father to hear their prayers all the while? Lastly, I wish to mention the dread pharaoh of Lovecraft's lore, the cunning, Luciferian figure of Nyarlathotep. Curious how, despite being made up by Lovecraft, this being was reportedly conjured up during spiritual seances and gave queer and profane answers to certain highly esoteric questions. We may never know, but that's the best part. Seeking clarity betwixt the undulating, ever-twisting tendrils of fact and fiction.
One of the interesting parts of the mythos is this fact that it has a presence both before and after Lovecraft in the human psyche and mythology, and thus the noosphere as a whole. You can see, though, that the ancient civilizations living alongside us and before and after us in the cosmos as a topic elsewhere than his work is usually downplayed. I think it's because of a typical human incomprehension of the possibility of there being other intelligent life. Lovecraft's world is interesting in that it's synaptically analogous to a lot of stuff in our collective psyche that reflects in analogy things and creatures that resemble his mythos constantly, sometimes without even knowing much about him and his work.
Well, the entities he talked about are real. At least the big ones and popular ones I interacted with, such as Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep, Azathoth, Hastur, Shub-Ne-Gurath. I recommend anyone to do rituals with them if you feel the connection. They gave me advice about things about spirit-material balance, especially remembering what I read from Nyarlathotep on this, and he came into my dream and altered it in one of the most unique ways, which I never say before altering walls and space-time fabric. Cthulhu especially showed up a few times and taught me some abyssal tentacle astral techniques for defense and some other stuff. Did multiple rituals with him and wanted to be with him as the patron king demon of my next life, as I love him a lot as many other great demons, and my spirits recommended this too. Overall, yes, very different beings as expected to the usual demons we're more associated with, but very nice and friendly and lovely and teach a lot and very well. For anyone interested in sample rituals, 1. Put on a black candle or maybe dark blue or whichever you feel. 2. Write a letter on a piece of paper stating your intent that you want to interact with them and have them teach you their ways, or anything similar astral is exciting with them. 3. Burn an incense. Maybe something musky sandalwood is always good. 4. Burn the letter and say your thanks. Bonus 5. If you'd like an extra, give some food or drink of your choice as an offering. It's a good and nice experience.
He was an anal retentive Anglo on the spectrum who never strayed far from civilization. He considered himself a scientist, a rationalist, and his inspiration only came mostly from paper. However, this does not necessarily mean he could not attract the attention of the immaterial. Some of those close to him also had hallucinations and were driven to insanity. Peculiar circumstances followed him throughout his life. He seemed to draw mostly from Algernon Blackwood and Arthur Machen, whose works were influenced by their membership in Golden Dawn and related beliefs. However, unlike them, he was a materialist and atheist. This may have counterintuitively brought him closer to the kind of things men like Algernon and Arthur sought, and many on/x/ entities of the other sea are not like humans. They don't care if someone is agreeable, only that they are honest and genuine. I guess the closest thing to an entire cosmological concept in Lovecraft's canon can be found in the much underrated Randolph Carter stories, particularly Through the Gates of the Silver Key, an extremely interesting yarn, talking about multiverses and all kind of at the time absolutely brilliant and not widely discussed shit in a great manner. Lovecraft was always a staunch atheist and mechanistic materialist on the outside, but his work betrays that he certainly thought very deeply about the cosmos and humanity's place within it. His idea that the entire universe is but the dream of a blind idiot god, Azathoth, comes pretty close to some Gnostic ideas. You can see the great old ones as a representation of archon-like creatures with immense power that have interfered with this plane of existence for an eternity. There is a lot of things like that which you can find in his works. Many of them were also literal dream transcripts, like Nyarlathotep, or deeply influenced by his dreams, like the Call of Cthulhu and many others. Lovecraft was an extremely vivid and often lucid dreamer, and he may have seen stuff in his dreams and visited places that we can't even imagine. Dreams and their importance are one of the most constant themes throughout his entire work, from early stories like Hypnos or Beyond the Wall of Sleep to the very late science fiction stories such as The Shadow Out of Time. Lovecraft is speculating in his stories, but they are tempered by his rational mind. The hard problem of consciousness and other big questions lead to metaphysics and in turn Hermeticism and other such attempts to bridge the material and spiritual world. He didn't have to believe them to explore these ideas, and they found their way into his work. Consciousness can't be limited to humans, surely. One can imagine another intelligent species, one can also imagine other forms of consciousness. Things fundamental to us like understanding and the senses might be absent in them, or heightened to extremes. There might be other elements completely incomprehensible to us or ways of merging or distorting consciousness. There might be some field or dimension where these laws operate. Cthulhu and the rest are manifestations of these theories. I guess Lovecraft had to temper his ideas in that way. Both his parents died in an insane asylum, and he was borderline self-ending in his youth, particularly after the death of old Phillips and the loss of his home, then again after the death of his mother. He again became a self-ending candidate when he was in New York and could not stand it. Lovecraft had to build a bulwark against those things gnawing at the edge of his outstanding mind since early childhood. He might have had extremely spiritual experiences in his youth, as he writes in his autobiography how he literally saw nymphs and fauns and all kinds of nature spirits, but he had to fight back against all of that in a, finally successful, attempt to not lose his mind and sanctity completely for the rest of his life. The only outlet he had to deal with these things was his art, and that is what makes it so special, and what has made him the most influential horror author ever. No exceptions. He is far more important and impactful than Edgar Allan Poe, let alone anyone after him, and his stories have aged extremely well. The main reason for that is, in my opinion, their authenticity. When he writes about well-educated, scholarly New England gentlemen going insane, or walking along the edge of insanity, because they are confronted with the inexplicable and horrible other, he always writes about himself.
Void, be careful looking into it though. Void magic is the closest thing to an in real-life cognito hazard I've come across. It's not to be confused with the abyss or working with demons, it's much worse. I do have some of it bookmarked, but I honestly don't know if it'd have an interest or if I should post it. But it seems to be the closest thing to Lovecraftian magic and eldritch truth. Most people, from what I've been able to gather anecdotally, are terrified of it, if they know of it. And it's only stories, but many people say it's one of the quickest ways to go insane and off yourself. Void entities supposedly predate hell or demons or anything supposedly. Some have said it's where God, insert whatever creator deity, originated from. Mind you, a lot of this conjecture. And apparently void magicians are pretty secretive and elusive or dead and crazy, so from what I've seen it's hard to find a lot on it. It's interesting, but it's a lot. There isn't a lot that scares me. But that's the only subject that's ever made me actually pause and consider the ramifications of just learning about it.
I wish I could wander the Dreamlands like Curanes.
I can astral project to key locations within my own dream worlds. Maybe it's an avenue you should explore yourself. I think even Lovecraft could somewhat find himself in the places he describes. For some, to me, it seems writing and thinking about places enough makes them more tangible, enough to be visited through either imagination or what some describe as out-of-body experiences using vision states in your mind. It's all the weirder when such events tie back into synchronicity events in your life. To be quite honest, I found having enculturing a spatial intelligence worth a crap is good for that kind of activity, but also that you need a good vital force and mental focus to maintain and explore things there. They do seem to all tie back into a larger compilation of accessible places for me within several dream worlds that are a bit twisted versions of this one, but somehow a lot of these places feel like I've lived by them my entire life despite being entire modifications of the real world. I did visit places akin to Lovecraft's dream worlds, but only on rare occasions. It was a very ancient-looking industrialist human civilization that had cities on platforms in the desert, all self-sufficient. I crawled from the muck and climbed my way up to them. I had a lot of weird dreams like that seemed like they were from a lost era, some of them self-referential to that topic too, as if I was supposed to know about it. I can't really visit those places in dream worlds like I can a lot of other dreams places though, which is foreboding.
I did have some weird experiences with remote viewing, be they coincidental guess or actual prediction, but they were right and somewhat appropriate, so I guess they might be true. I'll admit to you, I don't try to prove that shit right or wrong, I just think it's very uncanny that it ties into synchronicity and otherwise totally unrelated situations in the real world. Why would our world be influenced endlessly by a seemingly endless chain reaction of events that never ends instead of being a set and ready all written up story like a writer's thinking would have it? I don't know, but I've seen enough to be convinced there is more than a materialist world. The human mind really is the last frontier, and even materialist or less spiritual individuals in general could agree there is something bizarre going on in our reality. If anything, they are just as scared as me to find out more, as confirmation bias might make it a more sure thing in their mind, and they might change their mind more often. But if anything, it comes back enough and at a constant rate well established within the confines of its own logic that our reality will always be way more than many angles of truth than a single big lie. I just hate people having to come into that dualistic mindset because it sets the precedent that a lot of knowledge is invalid and unusable, but I do agree that unless you experience it, a lot of what's written about astral projection, remote viewing, and dare I say even a lot of what I write here seems very fetched. I guess I might just have a very active imagination. Be it may these places seem as tangible as places I've already been to in real life, only at some key moments and not all the time like this constant material reality.
There is this book. The Book of the Old Ones. This is an ancient system of using the most powerful beings in the world, the Old Ones. The author tells you everything he learned and knows. In the dimly understood area of magic, which you are about to explore, the Old Ones equate to the elemental forces of the earth. Air, fire, and water. You will learn how to bring the surging powers of the Old Ones into your life. But it is more than that, it is the true secrets of the Necronomicon. In the pantheon of the Old Ones, there are 6 primary beings. Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, Nyarlathotep, Hastur, Cthulhu, Shub Ne Jo Wrath. Few know that the author Lovecraft had direct contact with the Old Ones and stated that at the time he was living. He stated that he had nightly contact with the Old Ones in his dreams. This book is not a fantasy or dream. It is written by a person that has contact with and knows the real power in the Old Ones. He has used the power for years with fantastic results. Unlike most other texts dealing with the Necronomicon gods' forms, this text gives you to follow and practical rituals to help you in your daily life. No special tools are needed to call upon. This easy-to-do system is very unique and powerful. Most Necronomicon systems require many special tools and long hours of work. This is a serious book for the serious occult practitioner. Learn the whole secret of magic, heal me, dream of Lovecraft. Magic is easy, sign of the Elder God, ritual of the Old Ones, cult of the Old Ones, creating your personal Necronomicon. Cast spells the work, success, wealth and love rituals. Increase physical power, enslave a partner. Protection, destroy enemies and much more. This is so powerful of a book we had to think carefully if we wanted to print it. The Old Ones predate all magical systems. Their power is beyond our understanding. You need to approach them with respect they deserve or be ready to pay the price.
But for real, haha, it's funny that this guy wrote occult horror stories back in the early 20th century, and there's all sorts of weird shit in some of them, and you wonder who just imagines all of this extremely and explicitly detailed shit. I wonder what his inspirations were, haha, like in the case of Charles Dexter Ward he's writing about. Spoilers ahead. All this batshit crazy crap some occultists from around the time of the Salem witch trials were up to that would contact otherworldly beings and bind themselves to them for supernatural powers, and what well-to-do members of society might consider knowledge of forbidden things, and one of the most complex rituals involves whack-job shit like having an expensive and meticulously detailed portrait of you being specially painted so that in the future when an almost completely identical male heir born into one of your descendants' families hundreds of years after the locals killed you for doing all sorts of really messed up shit and seemingly never aging, you can have that portrait be the catalyst that sends your lookalike heir into figuring out puzzles and clues, culminating in him completing the ritual that literally brings you back from the dead and rematerializes your body so that you can murder your heir and take his place in society. 100 years go by and we have internet and shit now, and there's all this conspiracy nonsense schizos keep going on about in places like this, and boomer Christians that started having kids around the time of the satanic panic think they're all nuts and should be locked away. But it's funny cause their Bible includes chronicles about a king that literally became one of the most renowned kings of his time, and how he was given by his patron deity the power to summon and control demons to help him build grand feats of architecture. And isn't it hilarious how Taylor Swift sorta resembles Cena LaFay, and there's this old portrait of a guy that looks like Keanu Reeves.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.